Hello and welcome to the June edition of Bridge to India's monthly update on renewable energy tenders, auctions and policy announcements. In this video, we provide you a summary of all major tender and policy updates. Tender and auction activity witnessed a sharp decline in June. Only 1,359 megawatt capacity was tendered through the month, while there were no auctions. For the second consecutive month, SECI did not announce any new tender. There were 3 new battery energy storage tenders in the month by NTPC, REMCL and HAREDA, aggregating 29 megawatts. Rooftop solar tenders also saw a sharp decline with only 15 megawatt capacity tendered by Haryana and Uttar Pradesh. Bid submission deadlines were extended for 10 tenders. Bids were submitted for MSEDCL's 500 megawatt Pan-India solar tender. This chart shows monthly trend for tenders and auctions. As we can see, overall the market activity level continues to be subdued, a trend set over the last year. The primary reason behind this slowdown is a lack of demand from DISCOMs and delay in tying up PPAs. Now, let us look at the notable tender announcements. Railway Energy Management Company or REMCL issued a tender to develop 740 megawatt solar projects on railway land across 9 states including Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Punjab, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat and Maharashtra. Entire power output shall be consumed by the Indian Railways. The tender includes 21 project sites ranging between 12 to 98 megawatt in size. Bid evaluation and auction would be conducted in line with the packages that you can see in the table here. REMCL also issued a tender to develop 15 megawatt solar project with a 14 megawatt hour storage on railway land in Maharashtra's Nagpur district. Power generated from this project shall be procured by the Indian Railways. This is Railway's first pilot solar project coupled with battery energy storage on its vacant land parcels. NHPC reissued an EPC tender for a 50 megawatt floating solar power project in Kerala. The tender was initially floated in June 2020 and later cancelled amid execution challenges. The project would be located in West Kallada, a small village in Kollam district. The successful bidder shall be responsible for EPC as well as comprehensive operation and maintenance for 10 years. Maharashtra DISCOM MSEDCL issued a 500 megawatt solar tender under Kusum scheme. These projects would be developed near transmission substations in the Component A of the scheme. Component A of the scheme entails setting up 10,000 megawatt of decentralized ground-mounted grid-connected renewable power projects of up to 2 megawatt. Like all Kusum tenders, farmers have the choice of either developing the solar power plants on their own or lease their land to project developers. The tender comes with a tariff cap of rupees 3.05 per kilowatt hour. Manipur Renewable Energy Development Agency issued a tender to develop a 50 megawatt solar power project at Jiribam. Government land would be provided for project development on lease basis. This is the second utility scale solar tender floated for the hinterland state of Manipur. The first tender for 100 megawatt capacity was floated in December and has been in limbo since then. The tender has seen 5 tender extensions so far, with the last extended deadline being 26 June 2021. June saw only 2 new rooftop solar tenders. Firstly, Haryana Renewable Energy Development Agency or HAREDA issued a tender to develop 10.4 megawatt of rooftop solar systems both with and without battery storage. The projects would be set up at various buildings across Haryana and Chandigarh. The capacity of rooftop projects with battery storage would be 2 megawatt and the remaining capacity would be set up without battery storage. Tender scope also includes operation and maintenance services for 5 years. Additionally, both the solar cells and modules used in project should be domestically manufactured. Uttar Pradesh New and Renewable Energy Development Agency also issued a tender to develop 5 megawatt rooftop solar systems at various government buildings across the state. Tender scope includes operation and maintenance services for 5 years. Uttar Pradesh has tendered 264 megawatt of rooftop solar projects to date, of which 100 megawatt capacity has been awarded so far. There were no auctions conducted in June. That was the roundup for tender announcements. Now, let's take a look at important policy and regulatory updates from the month. Let's begin with updates from the central government. Ministry of Power has extended waiver on long-term ISTS transmission charges by 2 years. The waiver would now be available to solar and wind projects commissioned by 30th June 2025. However, waiver for transmission losses would be available only to projects commissioned by June 2023. The waiver has also been extended in part to pumped hydro and battery storage projects commissioned by 30th June 2025 if minimum 70% of their power requirement is met from solar or wind plants. Applicable waiver for pumped hydro and battery storage projects would be 75% of interstate short-term open access charges in the first 5 years, 50% in years 6 to 8, 25% in years 9 to 11 before being phased out from year 12 onwards. The waiver would also apply to power traded in green day ahead and term ahead market until June 2023. This is the third extension of ISTS charges since its introduction in 2018. Between 2018 and 2020, 51 gigawatt or about 71% of total capacity was allocated under the ISTS framework. The waiver has allowed hinterland states like Haryana, Bihar, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh to procure renewable power from ISTS projects. On the flip side, the ISTS waiver has led to heavy concentration of project capacity in Rajasthan and Gujarat, inevitably exacerbating transmission bottlenecks. We believe that the ISTS waiver extension would worsen execution challenges in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Moreover, as solar and wind are already the cheapest sources of power, prolonging such incentives is unnecessary. It would have been better if the extension were granted only to storage projects to allow better regional spread of capacity and reduce effective cost of storage, which has been a major barrier in adoption of this technology so far. CERC has proposed that power supply to DISCOMs would be scheduled through power exchanges instead of sending procurement schedules directly to power generators. The mechanism would be implemented from April 1, 2022, and initially its rollout would be limited to NTPC power plants. Under MBED, DISCOMs and power plants would submit buy and sell bids at power exchanges. Power plants with variable charge lower than market clearing price would be fully dispatched in ascending order of their variable charge. Any difference between market clearing price and variable charge of power plants would be settled through bilateral contracts between DISCOMs and power plants. This will ensure that the power sale cost from each power plant does not exceed its variable charge. DISCOMs would continue to pay fixed charges to power plants. We believe that MBED is a huge potential reform for the power sector as it introduces much needed market discipline. The bilateral PPA structure is extremely inefficient and is holding the sector back. CERC estimates that MBED could decrease power procurement cost for DISCOMs by around 7%. Its implementation would also improve payment flows to IPPs as DISCOMs would be required to clear payment on day of delivery of power. Currently, average delay in payments by DISCOMs to power producers is more than 5 months. The government is proposing that public financial institutions like PFC and RSC would offer line of credit to DISCOMs to tide over the liquidity issues. Department of Heavy Industries has issued guidelines for granting cash incentives aggregating 181 billion rupees over 5 years to selected bidders willing to set up manufacturing facility for minimum 500 gigawatt hour of advanced battery storage capacity or 0.5 gigawatt hour for niche storage capacity. Through this policy, the government is seeking to develop 50 gigawatt hour and 5 gigawatt hour domestic manufacturing capacity for advanced battery storage technologies and niche storage technologies respectively by March 2024. Companies would be selected through competitive bidding based on subsidy bids subject to maximum capacity allocation of 20 gigawatt hour per company. The scheme comes with some tough riders. Minimum investment requirement is Rs 2.25 billion and commercial operations need to commence within 2 years. Minimum domestic value addition is specified at 25% going up to 60% within 5 years. We believe the scheme targets are overly ambitious in terms of capacity, time scale and performance conditions. Lack of crucial details related to technology, specifications, selection process, backward integration, localization and penalties could lead to implementation delays. Many companies have already begun to lobby the government for relaxation of various conditions. Also, we believe that the government focus on creating demand first would be more beneficial than creating manufacturing capacity. CERC has issued draft regulation for implementation of primary, secondary and tertiary ancillary services. The regulation proposes that NLDC, the nodal agency, would forecast volume of ancillary services required on day-ahead and real-time basis. Primary reserve services would be provided automatically and in real time through a speed governor system. Secondary reserve service would be provided by power plants with energy storage and consumers with load of more than 1 megawatt and response time of less than 30 seconds if difference between actual and scheduled power flow in a region exceeds 10 megawatt. Any power plant with energy storage or a consumer with response time of less than 15 minutes can offer tertiary services through power exchange. This service would be triggered if volume of secondary ancillary services exceeds 100 megawatt for over 15 minutes. NLDC would procure secondary services depending on ramp rate and variable charge of power plants. Consumers would be paid a compensation charge while power plants would be paid variable charges for supplying secondary services. An additional incentive of 0.1 to 0.4 rupees would be paid for providing secondary ancillary services. Tertiary service providers would be paid market clearing price discovered at exchanges. With the inclusion of energy storage as a source for ancillary services, new resources would be connected to the grid. Eventually, we also expect energy storage to be allowed to provide primary reserve ancillary services. Currently, NLDC procures ancillary services from a limited number of power plants connected to interstate power projects during outage of transmission or generation units or extreme weather events. Ministry of Power has proposed perpetual validity of RECs or renewable energy certificates and done away with the concept of floor and forbearance prices. It has also proposed to increase validity of resignation of existing projects from 5 years to 15 years and to 25 years for new projects. Other proposed reform measures include issuing additional RECs to less mature technologies based on multiplier system and allowing RECs to be traded bilaterally in addition to trading at power exchanges. The changes proposed have been long awaited. While all the measures are sensible, a key supply side hurdle remains unresolved. Since green attributes for most projects are passed directly to off-takers, the market faces a critical shortage on the supply side. It is not clear how this issue would get addressed. Now let's have a look at updates from the states. Gujarat Electricity Regulator has rejected a provision of state solar policy that requires 100% ownership by consumers in captive power projects. Ownership requirements shall continue to be governed by Electricity Act 2005 and Electricity Rules 2005, that is, Captive consumers must own a minimum 26% equity and consume at least 51% electricity generated annually. Rejection of provision related to 100% ownership in captive power projects is a major relief to C&I market and is expected to boost the PPA model. While landed cost of power under third-party sale mode is 7% higher than grid tariff, captive power projects deliver 22% savings for industrial consumers. Removal of project capacity limits and relaxation in banking period are also likely to catalyze growth. The Appellate Tribunal of Electricity has allowed TANGEDCO to verify ownership of captive power projects at the end of each financial year. However, DISCOMs would not be allowed to ask for historical ownership data. APTEL also ruled that TANGEDCO cannot levy cross-subsidy surcharge on consumers unable to meet ownership criteria defined in Electricity Act 2005 without approval from TNERC. Decision to restrict TANGEDCO from acting against captive power consumers is a positive move for the sector. Reference to Electricity Act and states open access procedures in APTEL's order would also provide regulatory clarity for new captive consumers applying for approvals. Uttar Pradesh Electricity Regulatory Commission has directed state DISCOMs to pay 14.6 billion rupees in penalty for shortfall in RPO compliance until 2021. It also directed the DISCOMs to deposit 58 billion rupees in RPO regulatory fund at an average cost of rupees 4.37 per kilowatt hour to be used for payments for renewable power procurement in current financial year. It also directed DISCOMs to set aside 58 billion rupees for procurement of renewable power in current financial year. It is rare for state commissions to levy penalty on DISCOMs for failure to meet RPO compliance. Issuing directions to DISCOM to furnish funds for expected renewable power procurement in advance is unprecedented. That concludes the summary of key tender and policy updates from June 2021. We hope you found this update useful. You can view all tender policy and regulatory information on the renewable sector in real time at India RE Navigator, a one-stop market intelligence portal for renewable sector. You can also write to us at contact@bridge2india.com if you have a query or feedback. We would love to hear from you. We'll be back next month with another update. Until then, goodbye and take care.